Artemis II is currently experiencing something that no human being has felt, seen, or endured in over half a century. For more than 53 years, not a single member of our species left low Earth orbit. Not once. It represents the longest gap in exploration since humanity first figured out how to leave the ground. A strange era where the moon transitioned from a destination back into a distant, unreachable light in the sky. That era ended just 4 days ago. A rocket carrying 4 astronauts punched through the Florida sky, carving a path through the atmosphere and aiming itself directly at the lunar disk. But if you think Artemis II is just a high-definition remake of the 1960s, you couldn't be more wrong. This isn't a sequel, and it's certainly not a repeat. Before we break down the incredible tech that makes this mission feel like science fiction, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're covering every step of this journey back to the stars, and you don't want to miss the deep dives coming up in the next few weeks as the crew approaches splashdown. The astronauts currently hurtling through the void, Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, are doing things inside that spacecraft that the Apollo crews couldn't have imagined. To the engineers of 1972, the systems keeping these 4 alive would have seemed like impossible magic. So, what actually changed in 50 years? The short answer is everything. It starts with the very environment they call home. When we think of Apollo, we think of heroes, but we rarely think about the sheer claustrophobia. The Apollo command module gave its 3-person crew about 210 cubic feet of habitable space. To give you a mental image, that is roughly the interior volume of a large walk-in closet. Imagine 3 grown men wearing bulky suits sealed inside a closet for up to 14 days. It wasn't just tight, it was a test of psychological endurance. Orion, the spacecraft carrying the Artemis II crew, gives its 4-person team 330 cubic feet. That's a 60% increase in room. It's roughly the space of 2 minivans parked side by side with the seats removed. By any normal Earth standard, it's still incredibly cramped. But when you are 250,000 miles from the nearest hospital and you haven't been able to fully stretch your legs in a week, the difference between a closet and 2 minivans is the difference between misery and manageable survival. This extra space allowed NASA to fix one of the most human problems of the Apollo era: dignity. Orion features a dedicated hygiene bay with actual doors that close. Inside is a universal waste management system, a high-tech toilet nearly identical to the one currently used on the International Space Station. It processes waste with something the Apollo astronauts never had: privacy. On the original moon missions, the crew used fecal collection capes, essentially adhesive plastic bags they had to tape to their bodies while their crewmates watched. They then had to seal those bags and store them inside the tiny cabin with them for the rest of the mission. Almost every Apollo veteran who has spoken candidly about the experience describes it as one of the most degrading and disgusting parts of spaceflight. The Artemis II crew will never know that particular indignity. Then there is the physical toll on the body. One of the most striking images from the Apollo era was seeing the astronauts being lifted out of their capsules. They couldn't walk. They were often placed immediately into wheelchairs because their muscles had turned to jelly and their bones had begun to thin. In the 1960s, NASA decided that for a 2-week mission, this level of physical decay was an acceptable price to pay. There was simply no room for exercise equipment. The Artemis II crew, however, exercises every single day. They use a device called a flywheel. It weighs about 30 pounds and fits into a space no bigger than a carry-on suitcase, yet it's a marvel of engineering. It works like a high-powered yo-yo using a cable-based mechanism that provides resistance based on how hard you pull. On this tiny device, the crew can perform heavy squats, rows, and deadlifts with up to 400 pounds of force. The idea of an astronaut performing a 300-pound deadlift in zero gravity while staring out the window at the moon is a sentence that would have sounded like total nonsense to anyone alive in 1969. Because of this, when they splash down, they won't need those wheelchairs. They will be able to stand on their own 2 feet. Even the way they got there is a massive leap forward. Apollo rode the Saturn V, the most powerful machine ever built at the time, generating 7.5 million pounds of thrust. The Space Launch System, SLS, that carried Artemis II off the pad on April 1st produces 8.8 million pounds. That's 17% more raw power. While SpaceX is focused on reusable boosters, the SLS was built for a different, more brutal task: throwing a fully loaded Orion and 4 humans toward the moon in a single, massive launch. No orbital assembly, no refueling, no docking required to leave Earth's neighborhood. But look at what sits on top of that rocket. Apollo was powered by fuel cells and batteries. Hydrogen and oxygen combined to create electricity and drinking water. It was elegant, but it was a countdown. Every single watt the crew used came from a tank that was slowly getting emptier. Orion, however, is a solar-powered beast. Shortly after reaching space, it unfurls 4 massive solar array wings. As long as the sun is shining, the power supply is effectively unlimited. This changes the very psychology of the mission. The spacecraft systems can run harder, the computers can stay on, and there is a massive electrical margin that Apollo crews would have killed for. Perhaps the most significant change is that this isn't just an American story anymore. Apollo was an American project from the last rivet up. Artemis is international by design. The service module, which provides the propulsion and life support, wasn't even built in the United States. It was built by Airbus in Europe. The next phase involves a space station in lunar orbit called the Gateway, built by a dozen different countries. The era of one nation going to the moon alone ended when Apollo closed its doors. What we have now is more complicated and slower, but it means the risk and the knowledge are shared by the whole world. Under the skin of the spacecraft, the digital jump is staggering. Orion's flight computers are roughly 20,000 times faster than the Apollo guidance computer. Apollo's computer had 72 kilobytes of memory. A modern toaster has more processing power than the ship that landed on the moon. Orion runs 4 independent computers in parallel, and the cockpit is entirely digital. Glass screens, software interfaces, and real-time trajectory adjustments. Because of this, Orion can fly itself. In 2022, during Artemis I, the uncrewed ship completed a full lunar mission and returned to Earth autonomously. This matters because it shifts the balance of power. On Apollo, the astronauts were essentially passengers who followed instructions from Houston. On Artemis II, the crew is performing manual piloting demonstrations in deep space, testing how a human can take over if the communication link fails. They are preparing for a future where humans go to Mars, where a 20-minute communication delay makes mission control a useless concept in an emergency. Speaking of communication, we've moved past the era of grainy, scratchy radio. While Orion still has radio backups, its primary system is a revolutionary laser communication array. Using infrared light, it can transmit data at speeds that would have been unthinkable 50 years ago. By the 4th day of the mission, the system had already downloaded 100 gigabytes of data. This is why we are seeing high-resolution, crystal-clear videos of the crew inside the cabin and breathtaking shots of Earth. Apollo's total data return for an entire mission was measured in megabytes. Artemis is doing that in seconds. The views themselves are a new experience. Apollo missions stayed very close to the surface, about 70 miles up. At that altitude, they saw narrow strips of craters passing beneath them. Artemis II is taking a high-altitude flyby, coming within about 4,600 miles of the surface. From this distance, the crew can see the entire disk of the moon at once, the whole sphere, pole to pole, filling their windows. No Apollo astronaut ever had that specific perspective at their closest approach. And because of the timing of the launch, the crew has already seen something no human has ever looked at directly: the Oriental Basin. It's a massive 600-mile-wide impact crater on the edge of the moon's far side. Because of the lighting during the 1960s and 70s, it was always in shadow or out of view for the Apollo crews. NASA has confirmed that Christina Koch and her crewmates have already photographed it. For the first time, a human being looked at a feature of the moon that had only ever been seen by cold robotic lenses. They are also on track to break the record for the farthest distance any human has ever traveled from home. That record belongs to the crew of Apollo 13, who reached 248,000 miles because they had to slingshot around the moon to survive an explosion. Artemis II is aiming for 252,757 miles. It's a purposeful milestone. What was once an emergency survival trajectory is now the primary flight plan. But the most terrifying part of this 10-day mission is the return. When Orion hits the Earth's atmosphere, it will be traveling at 25,000 miles per hour. That is faster than any human-rated spacecraft has ever traveled during re-entry. The heat shield will face temperatures of 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. As the superheated plasma wraps around the vehicle, it will block all radio signals. For those few minutes, the crew will be completely and utterly alone, trusting in a heat shield that actually caused some concern during testing. Engineers saw unexpected flaking on the previous flight, but after years of analysis, NASA gave the go-ahead. The crew accepted that risk. They represent a new era of humanity. Victor Glover is the first person of color to go into deep space. Christina Koch is the first woman. Jeremy Hansen is the first non-American. Apollo was exclusively white and male, not because others weren't capable, but because the system was closed. Artemis II changes that. The first people to see the moon in half a century finally look like the species they represent. At its core, this mission is a medical study. The crew is wearing radiation monitors to see what 10 days outside Earth's magnetic field does to human DNA. We are gathering the data that will decide how we get to Mars. As you hear this, they are approaching the silence of the far side. For 40 minutes, they will be cut off from everything. No Twitter, no Houston, no radio. Just 4 humans in a metal shell, 250,000 miles from home. That silence is the one thing that hasn't changed. The moon still blocks the signal. The void is still the void. But this time, when they come back, they won't be finishing a race. They'll be opening a door. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.